be speaking about language policy and language revitalization, especially with respect to indigenous languages in Peru. As many of you know, Peru is a South American country on the Pacific coast, and the structure of my brief presentation will be about some demographic data. I'll talk a little bit about language rights, and then I'll present two aspects of language revitalization. One is related to intercultural bilingual education and their policies, and the next aspect will be the activities that the current Ministry of Culture is undertaking for revitalization of indigenous languages in Peru. So this is the map of Peru, and as you can see, Peru is a multilingual country. It's a multicultural country, and as you can see there, and I will go into the detail of it, most of our territory is covered with speakers of indigenous languages. Here you see represented 47 language/language families, because some of the languages I will be speaking of should be more correctly represented as language families, such as Quechua, which is a language family that is widely known, or at least more widely known than the other indigenous languages. This map was elaborated in coordination between the National Office for Intercultural, Bilingual, and Rural Education in the Ministry of Education, in collaboration with the National Institute of Statistics and in consultation with indigenous organizations and other researcher databases. And I'll explain the reason for this map in a second. Here you see the 47 languages, indigenous languages spoken in Peru, and in terms of number of speakers, you could see that the Quechua family has around higher than 3 million speakers all over Peruvian territory. And it's followed by Aymara, have 1 million speakers approximately. This is data based on the 2007 census. And followed by other languages such as Xaninca with 97,000 speakers, and Awajún with 55. And then the other languages that are above 20,000 speakers, Shawi, Shipibo, Conibo, and at the 10,000s we have Cucama, Cucamiria, and Matsigenca, and One Piece. You see that the other languages have very low numbers of speakers compared to these previous ones, and I'm really sad to report that this graph from the Ministry of Education has one speaker of Taushiro, and while I was coming here, he passed. Well, while I was here, he passed away. So that speaker is no longer with us. So this is, I'm sorry, I forgot to say that in total around, we have more than 4 million speakers of indigenous languages in a country that has been projected to be around 30 million, having 30 million inhabitants. This is projected from the 2007 census, which had 28 million inhabitants. So this means that more than 10% of Peru speaks an indigenous language. So this makes language rights a very important issue for those of us who really care about this. And I'm going to speak about two pieces of legislation that have become crucial to the development of language revitalization and the respect of language rights. Indigenous languages are considered official where they're spoken, in the regions where they're spoken, by the Constitution of Peru. But two particular laws have made a great impact in language rights in Peru. And the first one is the prior consultation law. The prior consultation law stems from the fact that Peru is signatory of the Convention 169 of the International Labor Organization. This convention states that indigenous peoples have the right to be consulted prior to any administrative or legislative measure that is taken by the state that may affect their collective rights, their physical existence, their cultural identity, their quality of their development, their life and their development. And Brazil is signatory also of this convention. So the state is required to consult about plans for regional and national development programs and projects that may affect indigenous rights. This extends to linguistic diversity, and in fact it requires that in areas where they are needed, official interpreters registered by the state must be part of the consultation process. So this is stated in the prior consultation law. So this creates the need for official interpreters and official translators. It also requires the creation of an official database of indigenous peoples, therefore the map that I showed you at the beginning, with official self-determined denominations, geographical and cultural relevant information, and a list of representative organizations and an ethno-linguistic map. So these are all efforts that are currently ongoing. The second piece of legislation that is very important to understand language rights in Peru is the language rights law. This was passed in 2011 too. This law guarantees the individual and collective rights of indigenous peoples to speak their languages, to be served by the state in their language, and to receive bilingual intercultural education in their language and in Spanish, which is the shared language for the whole country. So according to this law, indigenous languages are official languages of Peru in the areas in where they're spoken, following the constitution. But as Marcus and I were talking, our countries are very good at laws. They're not that good at implementing these laws. So in terms of maintenance and revitalization, how does this translate? These are beautiful laws. You listen to me and you're thinking, oh, of course they're enforced. But this is where I'm going to speak about the challenges of really making these laws into a reality. And I'm going to be speaking about two important aspects. One is intercultural bilingual education, and the other one is language planning. So there are legal bases for intercultural bilingual education in addition to the previous laws that I mentioned. Article 19 of the education law states that indigenous people must be, must be in agreement with international treaties. This is in accordance to Convention 169, the Constitution, and the education law itself. And that the state recognizes and guarantees the right of indigenous peoples to equality in education with respect to the rest of the nation. So this is part of our education law. So this means that intercultural bilingual education must be implemented. And this has been happening since very early on in the 90s. And now we have a national office for intercultural bilingual and rural education. And this section of the Ministry of Education is in charge of the following activities. Curricular development, including language standardization, elaboration of educational materials, teacher preparation and training, and coordination with other units. Crucially, a new unit within the Ministry of Culture. Before, not only did the Ministry of Education have all these roles, but they also had to undertake the role of language planning. But fortunately, the Ministry of Culture was created some years ago so that the Ministry of Culture would have a national office for indigenous languages in charge of language planning. The Ministry of Education also requires for each one of its units to collaborate with the General Assessment Unit. This is the unit that produces these wonderful records of how many students pass the PISA test, how highly ranked is Finland, and how lowly ranked is the rest of the world in terms of taking standardized tests. So this is an internal tension in Peru between respecting indigenous rights and testing as high as possible within South America, which is always not achievable. So in terms of the total number of intercultural bilingual schools, here you see that there's at least higher than 18,000 schools that have been labeled intercultural bilingual schools, most of which are at the primary level school. This is for data for 2013. More than 9,000 schools are primary schools. But you see a drop in secondary schools. So even though the law mandates that it should happen throughout the school lifetime, it's mostly focused on primary schools. And there are also some daycare schools. Now, what are the challenges? I'm giving you these numbers and you're thinking each and every one of these schools is an actual intercultural bilingual education school, but that's not the case because one of the main challenges is coverage and monitoring within a centralized state. Peru is a highly centralized state, so central authorities have a hard time reaching out to all of the schools in rural areas and indigenous areas and actually monitoring the fact that the school has not labeled itself an intercultural bilingual education, but it's just a label because some of the teachers require training. And so this creates one of the challenges. And the other major challenge for a country like Peru is resources for teacher training, actually making available resources for teaching training. In terms of language standardization, the first step has been to create alphabets, official alphabets for the majority of indigenous languages. What you see in the image above is in the upper part you see the 21 languages for which there's an official alphabet. It's divided in only 2 have an absolute consensus and have been officially declared at all levels as official alphabets. 19 have an intermediate kind of agreement or that has been approved by the Ministry of Education. You see there 10 have reached some consensus between the populations and the Ministry of Education, and 16 have no consensus with respect to this. And I like to say that even those that are listed as having official alphabets and having consensus, there's indigenous groups within the community that disagree with the alphabet. So this is one of the major issues that we have to deal with. Now, in terms of the other language planning and activities taken up by the Ministry of Culture, the Ministry of Culture has created a sound map of Peru that I hope you can see. I don't want to take too much of your time. If it doesn't open, I'll just tell you what this is about. This is online, available through web, and what you can see there in the statistic map is that you have the map of Peru with the many languages spoken there, and you can click on them and you can see, you can click on the languages, you can hear audio in each one of the languages. You can hear Aymara, Achuar, and you also have the list of interpreters and translators according to region. And as I will show you in a second, goes here. There's a list of registered interpreters and translators in there's a list of 173 interpreters and translators in indigenous languages to comply with the prior consultation law that I mentioned before. They are registered, they have been trained by the Ministry of Culture, and they can be accessed. And here you see a picture of Dina Ananko Anawanchi, a Wampi interpreter, that was featured in an article in the BBC News in 2014 for her role as interpreter in a trial in the state against the Wampi people due to social unrest in Bagua in 2009. So her role was very important. Other projects that the Ministry of Culture is undertaking, promoting the project of actually developing a Peruvian Institute of Indigenous Languages, similar to what Brazil has, and a program called Keeping Voices Alive in connection with a state-run program that's called Pension 65 that supports seniors and retired people. And the purpose of this project is to work with indigenous elders. The program Multilingual State, which has as its main goal the use of indigenous languages in the public sector. This, of course, is only extended to 2 regions and in a very minor way, the Cusco region and the San Martin region. So what are the challenges here? Coverage, resources for state communication, and extending bottom-up approaches, because everything I've told you now is from the state downwards, and the state has not the strength to have wide coverage, and there are challenges. The opportunities, as Jane mentioned, I think we see many, because with technological advances, we think that we can support community efforts. Access to state services can be made widened through mobile phones, and also we can provide teacher resources. So some of us are very interested in hearing more about apps, crowdsourcing, mobile access, all the things that can strengthen communities. And with this, I stop. Thank you.